Chapter 4. The original cello case, Sophie's life raft, was kept at the foot of her bed. For her 11th birthday, Charles sanded away the mildew and bought some paint. "What color?" he asked. "Red. Red is the opposite of sea colors." It was difficult for Sophie to love the sea. Charles painted the cello case the brightest red he could find, and set a lock on it. He stacked her precious things inside, and midnight snacks. She opened it only as a treat, or if she had one of her dark sea nightmares. If Sophie had known how important the cello case would prove to be, she would probably not have stored honey in it, which always manages to leak. But she did not know. It is impossible, Charles always said, to know everything. Charles warned her not to think too much of the cello case. "Be careful not to treasure the wrong things in life," he said. "We cannot tell if it is rightfully yours, Sophie. You may not be able to keep it. Someone may claim it." "Yes, I know," Sophie grinned. "Someone will claim it. My mother will, when she comes." Sophie spat on her palm and crossed her fingers for luck. It was like a reflex. She spat and crossed them 100 times each night. "The case may not have belonged to your mother. It might have been snatched up by her as the ship went down. Women very rarely play the cello, Sophie. In fact, I have never heard of a woman who does. A violin is more usual for a woman." "No," said Sophie. "It was a cello. I know it was. I remember. I remember her fingers on the bow." Charles bowed his head in a courteous nod, as he always did when he disagreed. "I remember the ship well, Sophie. I remember the band, but I do not remember, Sophie, any women with cellos. But I do." "Sophie, no. The band was made up of men with mustaches and greased hair." "I remember, Charles. I do." "I know." Charles's face was too sad to look at. Sophie scowled at her ankles instead. "But dear heart, you were a baby." "That doesn't mean I don't remember. I saw her, Charles. I really did. I remember the cello. The arguments were always the same. How did you make people believe you?" Sophie thought. "It was too slow and too unwieldy. It was impossible. I saw her floating. I did. She balled her fist. If she had not loved him so much, she would have spat at him. And yet, my child, I did not see her. I was there too." He sighed so deeply that his breath ruffled the curtains. "I know it's hard, Sophie. Life is so hard. My God, life is the hardest thing in the world. That is the thing people should mention more often." Almost every night, Sophie went mother watching. She snuffed the candle and sat on the windowsill with her legs swinging, watching the mothers on her street go by. The best ones had faces full of wit. Sometimes they carried sleeping children, fat babies and toddlers with legs stuck out at peculiar angles. Sometimes they sang as they passed by under Sophie's dangling feet. That evening, though, Sophie took out her sketchbook. It was leather and soft from being kept under her pillow. She drew in it every birthday. Sophie's pencil was bluntish, and she chewed at the lead to sharpen it. Then she closed her eyes and tried to remember. She drew a pair of black trousers worn thin at the knee. Worn at the knee is surprisingly difficult to draw, but she did her best. And on top of them, the torso and head of a woman. She added hair. She had no colored pencils, but she bit at a hangnail and used a little blood to paint it red. Then, with her pencil over the face, Sophie hesitated. "Oh," she whispered. And then, "Think." And then, "Please." But she could remember only a blur. At last Sophie drew a tree blowing in the wind, and then drew hair blowing across the face. Mothers are a thing you need, like air, she thought, and water. Even paper mothers were better than nothing, even imaginary ones. Mothers were a place to put down your heart. They were a resting stop to recover your breath. Under her picture, Sophie wrote, "My mother." Her finger was still bleeding, so she drew a flower behind the woman's ear and colored it red. Every night before she went to sleep, Sophie told herself stories in her head, in which her mother returned to find her. They were long and difficult to recall in the morning, but they ended in dancing. When she remembered her mother, she always remembered dancing.